Our next speaker is Dr. Vicky Freedman. Vicky is the Soil and Groundwater Program Manager for the DOE Office of Environmental Management sector at PNNL, with nearly 20 years of experience in practical applications of contaminant fate and transport in environmental systems. At PNNL, she leads the Deep Veda Zone program, integrating investments from basic science, applied research, and site contractors to collaboratively identify innovative remediation alternatives for deep Veda Zone challenges in characterization, prediction, remediation, and monitoring. In addition, Vicky collaborates with the site contractor on Hanford tank performance assessments and has led the development of Akuna, an open source cross-platform software designed to support multiple simulators for modeling subsurface flow and transport, and a complete track of the simulation workflow, which is subject she will talk to us about. For those who are participating on WebEx, if you could mute yourself so that we avoid the background noise, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ming. I'm sure it's no coincidence that they've instituted this new rule of staying close to the platform when the shortest person in the room gets up and has to stand behind the podium. But I'm good with it. As long as you can see my head, it's great. I think the people online probably can see me better than you can. So today I'm going to be talking about Akuna. Akuna is actually there is some feedback coming through here. I can hear a little bit. So, but Akuna is software that was actually sponsored by the Office of Environmental Management. It was part of a program called Advanced Simulation Capability for Environmental Management, and it involved the development of two pieces of really critical software. One was developing a subsurface simulator that could be used across the DOE complex for decision making, and the second one was this software called Akuna. And just to clear up sort of right off the bat, Akuna does not stand for Akuna Matata. It's not a Disney. It's not a Disney reference. The person that originally led the development of Akuna was actually he was from England. His wife was from Australia. He lived in Australia. Akuna in Aborigine means water, so that's where that came from. Oops. So I'm trying to figure out how to switch slides, but I'll get it because I'm a modeler. Okay, so Akuna is really software that's supposed to make a modeler's life easier. I think it also makes a regulator's life easier. Anybody who wants to find out about how modeling was performed. So Akuna is really just kind of this set of pre- and post-processing tool sets that are used to help a modeler get the data into the model, and then once the simulations are executed, how do you process that data when it comes out on the other side? We provide some job launching. I guess I have to move this way. Okay, okay, so hopefully people on WebEx can still hear me. So it provides job launching scripts. This is nice if you need to execute your physics-based models on a high-performance computer, okay? Sometimes that is a barrier for people to get to use, an HPC environment. In general, my experience is it's not that difficult, but I can tell you just this past week, I had some difficulty launching HPC simulator, and it had to do with how memory was allocated on nodes. And so we can provide scripts like that will help people launch sort of simulation ensembles, that sort of thing. And that kind of takes that sort of dirty work out of the modeler's purview and responsibility. So Akuna is open source. It's platform independent. I run on a Mac. You can run on a Windows machine. If you're a Linux user, we also have a Linux distribution as well. Akuna was originally developed to be tightly coupled with this simulator called the Monzi. But we thought early on, boy, it would be really great if we allowed other simulators to use the same platform. And so we've sort of refactored it, and now it's simulator agnostic. You could run, it doesn't have to be a subsurface simulator. It could be like a, something that simulates landslides or any sort of thing, surface water. To date, what we have incorporated into Akuna is a Monzi. We have Stomp and eStomp, which is sort of the PNNL simulator, subsurface simulator. And then we have something called GeoSim, which I'm going to be talking a lot about in a little bit. So why use Akuna? I've sort of alluded to that initially, is really it kind of provides, I think, from somebody who's not a modeler, it's a tool to kind of look inside the model and to easily see. I mean, I'm kind of a visual person, so it's nice to look at maybe a user interface rather than something that is a comma delimited file, right? And I think it also enhances communication then between modelers and stakeholders and regulators and anybody that they need to communicate with. So as a modeler, I'll say a former modeler, because now mostly all I do is manage, I think it helps with sort of streamlining the workflow. There are tool sets that allow you to kind of generate your grids. You can see prior to executing your simulation, you can see what your domain looks like, which is kind of an advantage as well. And then I think for me, what really helps is we have these automated scripts that kind of help you launch a bunch of simulations at the same time. So yesterday, Emily was talking about sensitivity analyses. That's something that we can stage for the user, and it just kind of automatically launches it. We track it, and we bring the results back. The other thing that I think is really critical in terms of what one of the advantages is that we will maintain sort of data and simulation provenance. So if you've executed a simulation, there's some metadata associated with it that said, hey, it was executed by this user on this date. It's located in this directory. We also have, for simulators that do reactive geochemical transport, nice interface for that. I'll show a couple of screenshots for that. But I think one of the real, I can see I spelled linkage wrong, maybe. But one of the real advantages is this ability to link multiple codes together. And that happens a lot in performance assessments, right? Yeah, your outputs from one model need to go as inputs into the next model. And so I'm going to be showing you an example of that with this GeoSim code. So first I'm just going to give you a high-level overview of what Akuna can do. This is what it looks like when you log into Akuna. Akuna is something you install on your local computer, on your laptop or your desktop computer. There's some tabs here at front, up at the top, and then there's says take a tutorial, browse my projects, that sort of thing. You click through there to get to where I normally start, and this is what I call kind of the Windows view of the world, right? Sort of in this area. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Are you able to see my mouse? Maybe not. But in the upper left-hand corner, you kind of have that's sort of the file browser where your model's located. And you'll notice that there are kind of different colored icons. Those represent, oh, it's right up here. Thank you, Pat. Okay, now I have to figure out which button to use, right? So this right here, you have different colored icons depending on which simulator you used. And then you'll see that there's these tags right here. Well, this one didn't run successfully. It says there's an error. This one says, hey, that was a successful run. Over here, when you click on a particular folder, then you'll see where, what the contents of that folder are. And then I've clicked on a file here, and you can see the contents of the file. And this window right here shows you sort of that metadata, like where did you execute it, who executed it, that sort of thing. So when you initiate a model, this is kind of some screenshots of what the model setup tool looks like. You have, in model setup, kind of we've got sort of a process that we like to try to lead the user through in terms of how you set up a model. This is a screenshot from material properties in terms of what you fill out. And this is what I mean by just it's kind of a visual in terms of what the assigned properties are. And then if you click this button up here, it says visualize, then you'll see a visualization of your simulation domain. And these are screenshots of two different model setups. They're not the same simulation. But that's the idea, is that you're just able to kind of click through, provide that information. And as someone who's a former modeler, a lot of times we use existing files, or we're used to kind of editing and our ASCII editors and stuff. And so we have this capability up here to just kind of import a file, and then it will all autofill for you. This is the geochemistry interface I was telling you about. I think this is where one of the real advantages to setting up reactive geochemical simulation comes in. These are just some screenshots. These are just some drop-down menus. It's reading a database of that is based on EQ36. So we've set up what our primary species are. This is a screenshot from secondary species. And then here is just showing you what it looks like when you have to go and select what your solid phase species are. And then we have what we call simulation tool sets. So there's some static information that remains the same with model setup oftentimes, like your hydraulic properties, for example. So we do all that in model setup. And then you have to decide what kind of simulation do you want to run. We have what we call just kind of a single run, which just means you're just executing a forward run. It's just one simulation at a time. We also have a couple of methods for sensitivity analysis, not very sophisticated methods, but really we're just looking at trying to get some bread and butter capabilities into the software. So we have kind of a local method and then the global Morris one at a time method. And then we also have a tool set for doing inverse modeling. It's called PE. And then we have a couple of methods associated with doing uncertainty quantification. And to invoke that, all you do is you sort of highlight where your model setup is. That's the first part. And then there's these tool sets over here, and you click on those buttons, and then the user interface comes up. So this is just a screenshot from what the uncertainty quantification tool set looks like. This is, I'm in the sort of in my process tree right now. I'm setting up what my methods are and what parameters I'm looking at. Once you select your parameters, there's a simulation controller called Agni. It's installed locally when you install this software on your machine. It also runs on kind of the compute server as well. But what it does for you locally is it'll show you what that distribution looks like in terms of how your parameters are going to be sampled. And so this will change on the fly as you select different, like I think you can select from Latin hypercube sampling and random sampling. If you change your random seed, everything sort of it changes on the fly, and so you'll see what that distribution looks like. And then once your simulation has been executed, we can download the data. We have some plotting tool sets. This right here is showing kind of a simple problem where we executed an uncertainty analysis, and then we were able to kind of plot all 100 simulations all at the same time and said, you know what, I want to see what the mean value is. We plotted what the mean was right in here, and then said, well, what are the 95 upper and lower bounds on that, confidence intervals? And so we were able to kind of quickly plot that, can also do some histograms comparing inputs relative to outputs, that sort of thing. Initially, when we developed Akuna, we had developed something from the Visit software, because that's a DOE-sponsored visualization package. And so we called it kind of like a mini Visit. And what it did was you launched it locally, and then it reached out to the compute server, and you had to operate it sort of remotely. But we found is that Visit changes a lot, and this mini Visit didn't work very well because we had to constantly update it. And so instead what we've done is now we download the files, and then we just provide this little user interface right here that says, okay, you can choose whether you can use Visit, ParaView, TechPlot, whatever your visualization software is. You need to sort of browse for the path and say where it's located, and then we can just plot it. And we haven't done this yet, but our goal is to provide some scripts that will help kind of a user just sort of immediately visualize results. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about GeoSim. This work was actually sponsored by the integration into Akuna was sponsored by the Office of Science. They're looking at biogeochemical fluxes along the river, particularly in the 300 area. And this is a really good example of how you can use Akuna to set up all those model linkages. And so GeoSim is developed, for those of you who know Tim Scheibe, it was based on his PhD thesis. Some people at Wright State then took this on. And what it really does is it sort of creates a numerical aquifer based on channel belt geometry. And so it has these discrete bed forms. It starts out with a compound bar, setting those up, and then it fills it in with some unit bars and some cross strata. And it just creates a geologically heterogeneous domain. And it's a great test bed to evaluate sort of what the potential impacts are on from heterogeneity. So GeoSim, it's one word, but it's like 6 or 7 different programs, okay? And they have a unique way of executing each program. So I talked about, well, we start off with a compound bar. There's a code that's executed in serial that, based on the size of your domain, is going to determine how many compound bars are there. And it's you, as a user, input sort of statistical information about those compound bars. Then the next step is it fills in each of those compound bars with unit bars. And so the execution of that is embarrassingly parallel. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with that sort of terminology, it means for every you have to have the same number of compound bars as your number of processors you're executing on, because it essentially just works on one compound bar at a time. Then in the third step, it actually stitches all these compound bars together. And so this is using a different form of parallelism that's called domain decomposition. So it's working on a gridded domain at that point. And so at that point, each voxel can be assigned it gets assigned an indicator based on the material type. And what you see over here at right is some of the different, these are 5 different realizations of the same inputs. And what you see in terms of these thick bands here, these are channel fills that are fine sands and are of lower permeability. And what you're seeing here in these oranges are sort of they're the ends of the unit bars. And you can sort of see that right on the top of the domain. Once that comes out, then there's some post-processors that have to be executed. Some of them, this into VTK processes output into these 28 material types, even those, well, indicator types, and that's just so you can plot and see the edges of all these different units. And then we had another processor that would say, well wait, we want to execute this in STOMP or eSTOMP. And so then it created a file that, with the textual classes that STOMP and eSTOMP could read. So this is where I think having a user interface really helps. This is what the input file looks like. There's several different input files. There's probably like a half a dozen or so. But what we were able to do is put it in a user interface, define what each of, what each entry needed to be. And this is what the compound bar is that's being set up. And it kind of has this sort of rowboat shape, in my view. But once we exit, and remember, compound bars are executed in serial, so on our server, once you've completed this, it actually just in the background goes and executes it, comes back and says, hey, you've got 130 compound bars. Then the unit bars come in, and again, there's a couple of different input files associated with this. And again, we were able to, in the user interface, say, hey, this is what they all mean. And again, it's this statistical information about what's the average length, what's the variance of these different geometric structures, what do those look like. And a lot of them have angles, too, that you can use as input. And then there's cross-stratified deposits. Those get filled into the unit bars. And again, these are pretty messy-looking input files, and so having a user interface kind of helps with that execution and identifying what you're doing. And since a lot of this was developed with students, we actually found that there were some, you had to put in the same information in like an input file at the beginning as you did at the end, and you had to make sure it was consistent, and it was really easy to mess up. So this interface really helped clarify that. And then here, I guess you can't see it at all because I can't see it, and I'm thinking if you can't see it, there's no way. But this is where you get to say, well, based on the indicators that come out, how do we assign it a textural class? And so currently the way it's set up is to assign a textural class of fine sand, gravel, and I think kind of an open framework gravel. I'm actually not really clear on that, but or sandy gravel, I think. And so what you see over here, this was a really large simulation. You can see each of these compound bars. Those are the outlines. They're filled in with the unit bars, and this is kind of a cross-sectional view. This one, these simulations right here had hundreds of millions of cells. There were quite a few. And in the example simulation I'm going to show you, I don't have quite so many. This is the job control panel, and so the job control panel, we've set it up so we know how many compound bars there are. We set it up automatically for you. Say, hey, we know you got 150 compound bars. That means that first step is embarrassingly parallel, so we're going to automatically fill that in for you. And then we use that same number of processors to execute the second piece, which is uses domain decomposition. So the user really, all they have to know, they have to know where they're going to be executing it on the remote server, and then we have all the information already stored for this particular case. This is Cascade, our user facility computer. So we have the information in terms of the job queues and what the rules are for that. And then this is just another shot of the job launch right here. So once you've executed GeoSim, in order to see what your output is, you need to go back, open it up, and then there's a button you can click right up here. It says, I want to visualize the indicators, which goes 1 through 28, or I just want to see what the textural classes are. And you can see we have a much smaller domain than that one that was really large. And what we're seeing is just sort of the outer edge right here of a compound bar. So we've got a small piece of that domain. Okay, and so if a user then wants to take this domain and use the materials that are generated there, then you can just go up into, and I said earlier we have this import file or import option. You can go in and say, hey, it'll browse to the Akuna Windows Explorer view. You can click on it, and then it brings it right into your model setup. And you'll see right here, kind of in the background, the user can have some control over using these eyes. You turn sort of the colors on and off in terms of, I want to see, if you want to see just the sandy gravel, or you want to see, the fine sand sort of thing. So it allows you to turn things on and off, and you can call through the domain as well. And so I set up just this kind of demonstrative simulation. One of the nice things that you can do through Akuna is you can set up kind of these named regions. And so one of the easy things to do was then really, well, I want to make sure I've covered all the boundary regions right here. And so I just set up some regions on the side here, And I ended up inputting the kind of a solute as a boundary condition right in this region here. This is just simulation you're going to see is just kind of fully saturated with a gradient going from west to east, just to see if we can see what those impacts of heterogeneity are. And then I've just assigned a homogeneous property distribution to this for just like textural classes. But there is another code that you could use through GeoSim to assign permeabilities statistically as well. So let's see if I can get this going. So I'm going to just show this real fast. You'll see that's where the boundary condition was applied. And then before I start this, so this right here is this is a fine sand, so it's lower permeability. And you'll be able to see sort of a separation of the plume as it comes through right here. And then you'll see as well, since this little strip right here is higher permeability, you should be able to see that as well as it goes through. So you can see that impact. It's not a huge impact. That fine sand actually gets eroded after a couple of meters, so it's not very deep. But this is just really just kind of an example of how how this heterogeneity distribution will impact tracer transport for this particular problem I've set up for. Oops. I'm trying to actually change slides. It's not working for me. Okay. So just in summary, it's, Akuna is open source, cross-platform. It's really designed to just kind of help modelers, help regulators understand what's going on. We're currently looking at using it as an interface for the EMSL user facility in terms of allowing people some access to high-performance simulation. We have our own web page. You can download the software and install it. But that's kind of, I guess, where we're at in terms of the status of Akuna. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you, Vicky. Very interesting. So is it limited to subsurface flow and transport, or say, for instance, I was Bruce, now that I've offended Bruce, and I came to you and I said, I wanted to run Aeolus with this, for instance. What would need to happen in order?
So the most complicated piece is always the kind of the model setup, which can be bypassed. But what we've done to kind of help facilitate that, so that GeoSim integration, it took place over a period of 6 weeks. I mean, it was very fast. One of the reasons was because we developed this library that said, that allows the sort of the drop-down menus and all the white space needed to fill in the inputs to be generated using an XML ASCII file. So that makes it a lot easier. The thing that needs to happen is Akuna needs to learn how to read your input files, and then it needs to learn how to write them. So in the case of Stomp and eStomp, that's kind of a big task, right? I mean, there's tons of options, and that's a heavier lift. GeoSim was a lot easier, and that's why it happened over a short period of time. But it's not limited to subsurface modeling at all.
Okay. And then, can anybody get access to this, or is it
anybody
limited?
Can get access?
Anybody can. Yeah. Okay. And do you have you done, or do you plan on offering any training?
We do plan to offer training. I mean, I think that's the one way to get it out there. I mean, a couple of things that we're doing right now is one, working through EMSL, because I think that will help facilitate getting it out there. We're also been talking with Andy Ward and working with students at Florida International University to get them to start using it, and working on a problem at WIP. I think universities in general are key integrators. So yeah, we're always looking for ideas, but one of the things that we're doing, really sort of the primary push, is just we're going to use it internally, and we're going to use it to launch our simulations.
Maybe NSC can contribute to funding that training program.
Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like this will be available for anybody, and we can, suppose if you want to download, we can download in our system and we can
You
run
can.
it. Yeah.
Yep.
And what I understood that it has the capability of whatever the software right now available, for example, mod flows and everything can be just put into the system
So-
and can be.
Potentially, that's correct. ModFlow has some of the messiest output files, though, I've ever seen. So that's not really an easy lift. The thing that's unique about Akuna right now, in terms of it's looking at it's set up to work with sort of multi-phase simulators at this point, right? ModFlow has its own set of user interfaces, and I don't see any need to kind of replicate that. I know Amanzi has been looking at, well, maybe we ought to have a ModFlow to Amanzi translator that but we don't have any plans to set up ModFlow because of that, because they already exist.
Okay, you answered my that questions. But can you tell me, just summarize, what's the advantage of some of the things that currently is available? Either, for example, you mentioned about the uncertainty analysis, and a couple of things it can do, but not to that greatest extent. But it kind of so if I have to, for example, heterogeneity, you brought in heterogeneity issues, and we are trying to use the software which can handle the finest of the finest or minute of the minute heterogeneity and these things. That's always a computer simulation timing and all those issues are there. So with these things, can I be, is going to be helpful or more, how it going to work?
So I think what it allows you to do, so your model can be as complex as you want it to be, right? And it can be as refined as you want it to be. What this will help with is if you have those large models and you want to execute like a uncertainty parameter distribution, then we can set that up for you. The scripts will automatically substitute the values for you in there, and it would automatically launch it for you and bring the results back, and then you have tools at your disposal to view them. So it depends on how you're doing your uncertainty quantification. Are you doing it on sort of an abstracted model, which is one approach, or do you want to kind of ground truth that maybe with sort of a larger model that says, well, if we consider sort of the 3D conceptual model, how does that compare to an abstracted model? That would be one thing that it could do for you. I mean, I'm not a PA modeler, but how complex are your uncertainty analyses? Like how complex, I guess my question is to you guys, is how complex do the algorithms need to be in terms of sampling your uncertainty? So it's a matter of just incorporating those. We've just been trying to focus on getting the whole package together so that users have access to that. And then as we train and push Akuna software out there, they provide us with feedback in terms of what the next steps are and what they'd like to see.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it has to be short.
Okay, thank you. So say as a user I wanted to pick up Akuna and add a new simulator in there. Do you allow, you said it was open source, but do you allow modifications for that purpose? And is there version control on this?
There is version control, yes. If you wanted to add to it, right now we just use an SVN repository. We're getting ready to move it to GitHub. We'd like to get it to a version, so we're not qualified yet. That's something that will happen this year. So once that happens, it'll go to GitHub, and then people could contribute. So yeah, that's an option for adding your own simulator.
Thank you, Vicky.
Okay.
Thank you again.